People spend their whole lives learning which psychological buttons to push to get reactions from others: guilt, pressure, flattery, jealousy, emotional chaos. But the moment they try those same tactics on a Sigma male, everything collapses. The usual strategies fail, not because he's stubborn, but because he's built differently. His mind doesn't respond to pressure, it analyzes it. His silence isn't passive, it's a filter. And the harder someone tries to influence him, the clearer he sees their intention and the quicker he detaches. The Sigma male's greatest advantage is that he doesn't run on external validation or predictable emotional patterns. You can't trigger someone who isn't seeking approval, isn't afraid of solitude, and doesn't measure his decisions by how others feel. Most psychological games rely on insecurity, ego, or social pressure, and he's untouched by all three. Instead of reacting, he notices. Instead of reacting, he notices. Instead of absorbing the manipulation, he exposes it. And that calm refusal to respond the way others expect makes him one of the hardest personalities to influence, and the most intimidating to those who rely on control. If you're ready to break down the 11 triggers that completely fail on Sigma males and understand why manipulators panic when they encounter one, make sure you stay through the full video. And if you want more silent why-style breakdowns of deep psychology and untouchable self-mastery, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, which trigger do you think people rely on the most, and why does it fail on Sigmas? Guilt tripping doesn't work because he doesn't internalize manufactured responsibility. He recognizes guilt tripping the moment it appears, the subtle tone shift, the emotional bait, the attempt to make him feel responsible for someone else's discomfort. Most people absorb this pressure automatically, bending under the weight of expectations that were never truly theirs. But he doesn't. He separates emotion from obligation with surgical precision. When someone tries to make him feel guilty, he doesn't collapse inward or question his worth. He analyzes the intention behind the tactic. Instead of absorbing the guilt, he observes it from a distance, recognizing it as a tool of control rather than a sign of genuine connection. And because he refuses to carry weight that doesn't belong to him, guilt has nowhere to land. As the manipulation fails, the person using guilt starts to panic. They expected him to apologize, explain himself, or rush to fix a problem that wasn't his to fix. But he doesn't move. His expression stays calm, his energy steady, his presence unshaken. That stillness forces the manipulator to confront something they weren't prepared for. They can't influence him through emotional distortion. The usual hooks, emotional blame, exaggerated disappointment, strategic vulnerability, all fall flat. His refusal to internalize the guilt exposes the truth behind the tactic. It shows who wanted accountability and who wanted control. And the moment he doesn't react, the game ends before it even begins. His rejection of manufactured responsibility is what makes him so difficult to manipulate. He takes responsibility for his actions, but never for someone else's emotions masquerading as moral weight. By not accepting the guilt, he keeps his mind clean, his decisions clear, and his boundaries uncompromised. And the more he refuses to play along, the more people reveal their real motives. Some withdraw, some lash out, some try harder, but none succeed. Because you can only trap someone in guilt if they believe it's theirs to carry, and he never does. His freedom comes from that clarity, and that clarity is what makes him untouchable. Peer pressure fails because he refuses to align with the crowd for validation. He feels the weight of the crowd pushing in one direction, but it doesn't move him an inch. Where most people instinctively adjust themselves to fit the group's expectations, softening opinions, mimicking behaviors, trading authenticity for belonging, he stands still, not stubbornly, not defiantly, but with a quiet certainty that his path is not up for negotiation. Peer pressure relies on a fear of exclusion, a fear of being the outsider, a fear of losing approval, but he's already made peace with solitude, already built a life where validation isn't a currency he needs to survive. So when the group leans in, watching for signs of compliance, he gives them nothing. No shift in posture, no hesitant smile, no need to be accepted. His neutrality becomes a quiet rebellion. As others keep pushing, trying subtler tactics, jokes to undermine him, persuasive arguments wrapped in friendliness, warnings disguised as concern, he observes rather than absorbs. He notices how groupthink operates, how people merge into one voice to avoid standing alone. But he never mistakes volume for truth. The more the crowd insists, the clearer he sees how easily people abandon their judgment just to avoid discomfort. And that's exactly when he steps even further back, not out of arrogance, but out of instinctive self-preservation. He would rather walk alone with clarity than move with a crowd rooted in insecurity. His refusal to bend begins to unsettle people because peer pressure only works when everyone is afraid to break the pattern. He isn't. What makes him immune isn't resistance, it's independence. He doesn't rebel for attention and he doesn't comply for approval. His choices come from internal conviction, not social demand. The group eventually feels the shift. Instead of controlling him, they find themselves adjusting around him. Some grow curious, some feel threatened, some quietly start following his lead without admitting it. And that's the irony. The one who refuses to align with the crowd often becomes the one the crowd watches most closely. Peer pressure loses all power the moment a person no longer fears standing alone, and he never has. Silent treatment collapses because he's more comfortable in silence than anyone else. The moment someone tries to use silence as a weapon, they expect discomfort, tension, confusion, maybe even desperation. Most people rush to fill the void, fearing what the quiet might reveal. But he doesn't fear silence, he lives in it. The stillness that suffocates others becomes his natural habitat. When someone withdraws communication to gain power, thinking he will chase or panic, they misunderstand him completely. He doesn't see the silent treatment as punishment. He sees it as peace. Instead of reacting, he settles deeper into the calm, analyzing the intention without letting it touch his emotional center. And once silence becomes a shared space, he's the one who thrives, not the one who crumbles. As the silence stretches, the person using it starts to feel the imbalance. They expected him to break first, to ask questions, to offer explanations, to negotiate. But he gives them nothing. No agitation, no anxiety, no attempt to bridge the gap. His comfort and quiet exposes the hollowness of the tactic. The more they wait, the more they realize the silent treatment only works on those afraid of being alone with their thoughts. He isn't. His mind is disciplined, his emotions self-regulated, his presence anchored. While they sit in frustration, hoping their silence will create tension, he uses the time to gain clarity, recharge, and detach from anyone trying to manipulate him. Their attempt to control him dissolves in the very space they created. What makes this moment powerful is the unintended consequence. The person who initiated the silence becomes the one who feels ignored. They begin to question their leverage, their importance, their ability to influence him. The silence they once used as a tool turns into a mirror reflecting their own insecurity. Meanwhile, he walks through it unaffected, untouched, unconcerned. Silence doesn't threaten him, it strengthens him. And when he finally chooses whether to speak or walk away, it's on his terms, not theirs. The silent treatment only works on those who fear isolation. He doesn't, and that's why the tactic collapses the moment it meets him. Jealousy tactics fall flat because he doesn't compete for attention or affection. Jealousy is a game built on reaction, a raised eyebrow, a shift in tone, a spark of insecurity. Most people fall into it immediately, needing to reclaim attention, reassurance, or emotional territory. But he doesn't move, not even slightly. When someone tries to provoke jealousy to test his loyalty or boost their ego, he sees the tactic instantly. The exaggerated stories, the strategic mentions of someone else, the intentional comparisons designed to stir competition. Instead of tightening, he relaxes. Instead of chasing, he withdraws. He has no interest in fighting for a spot in someone's life because his worth isn't based on how hard he competes. If someone wants him to battle for their affection, they've already misunderstood the foundation he stands on. As the attempts escalate, the person expecting a jealous reaction starts to feel the imbalance. They thought their performance would spark urgency, insecurity, or emotional pressure, but all they get is calm observation. He listens without tension, looks without flinching, and responds with the same grounded presence he had before. His silence during these moments isn't indifference, it's clarity. He understands that anyone who uses jealousy to manipulate connection doesn't value authenticity, and instead of playing along, he simply removes himself from the emotional battlefield. His refusal to engage exposes the truth behind the tactic. It was never about affection, it was about control. What makes his response so disarming is that jealousy has no power over someone who doesn't fear loss. He knows that real connection can't be forced, measured, or competed for. It either stands naturally or collapses on its own. By not reacting, he sends a message far more powerful than anger ever could. If you need to provoke me to feel secure, you were never meant to hold space in my life. That realization often leaves the manipulator stunned, because jealousy only works on those who tie their value to another person's attention. He never does, and that emotional independence is why the tactic dies the moment it reaches him. Flattery fails because he sees intention, not compliments. He hears the compliment, but he doesn't absorb it, not until he understands the intention behind it. Most people melt under praise, soften their defenses, and open themselves to influence without realizing it. But he listens differently. The moment someone flatters him, he's not swept up by the words, he's analyzing the motive. Is it admiration, manipulation, or strategy? Is the praise genuine or a tool to redirect his choices? Instead of feeling elevated, he becomes sharper, more observant, more aware of the subtle shifts in tone and timing. Flattery loses all power when it enters a mind trained to look past the surface. As the compliments continue, helping to shape his emotions or gain access to his trust, the gap between intention and words becomes clearer to him. He notices the patterns, how praise appears right before a request, how admiration spikes during moments of disagreement, how validation is offered as a currency to influence him. While others might fall into the rhythm of pleasing or rewarding, he remains unmoved. His sense of worth doesn't rise or fall on external admiration, so the tactic misses its target entirely. The more the flattery intensifies, the more he sees the architecture behind it. He doesn't get excited, he gets informed, and that shifts the power completely out of the manipulator's hands. What makes him immune isn't distrust, it's clarity. He values authenticity deeply, which means he also recognizes when admiration is genuine versus performative. Real praise reaches him because it aligns with truth. Manufactured flattery dies instantly because he won't bend for words meant to shape his behavior. His calm, unreactive demeanor often unsettles people who rely on charm to gain influence. They expect openness, softness, compliance. Instead, they meet someone who listens without yielding and observes without attachment. Flattery only works on those who crave approval. He doesn't, and that's why the tactic fails before it ever has a chance to take hold. Urgency pressure doesn't move him. He decides on his own timeline. He feels the ticking clock others try to impose, but it never accelerates his mind. Urgency pressure is built on forcing quick decisions, triggering fear of missing out, or cornering someone into acting before they're ready. But he rejects all of it with a calm that disarms the person trying to rush him. When someone says, "You need to decide now," he hears the manipulation behind the words, not the message itself. He knows urgency is a tactic used to bypass logic, reduce thinking time, and gain compliance through stress. Instead of absorbing the pressure, he slows down. His silence becomes a shield, and the timeline he follows is his own, not the one someone else tries to force on him. As the pressure intensifies, those expecting him to crack start to feel their own anxiety rise. They thought a shrinking deadline would corner him, that a countdown would push him into emotional decision-making. But he doesn't move, he doesn't flinch, he doesn't shift his posture or pace. He evaluates, observes, and maintains control of his energy. And in that quiet refusal to rush, he exposes the tactic. He sees who benefits from the urgency, who wants to limit his clarity, and who fears what he might choose if he takes his time. The more they push, the clearer he becomes. The more they rush him, the more patient he gets. Their strategy collapses in real time. What makes him untouchable is that he understands timing is power. Acting on someone else's urgency hands that power away. Acting on his own timeline protects his judgment, autonomy, and emotional balance. He knows that anything requiring manipulation to accelerate probably isn't in his best interest. So he waits, not passively but intentionally. And when he finally makes a decision, it's precise, grounded, and entirely his. He cannot be rushed, cornered, or pressured, because he doesn't fear delayed action or temporary uncertainty. He trusts his pace more than he trusts anyone else's urgency. And that is why the tactic dies the moment it meets him. Emotional manipulation fails because he reads patterns instead of reacting to emotions. He doesn't get swept into emotional waves the way manipulators expect. When someone tries to twist feelings, weaponize vulnerability, or trigger guilt, he doesn't fall into the emotional trap. He studies it. Instead of reacting to the surface-level emotion, he tracks the sequence, the shift in tone, the timing of the story, the inconsistencies in their words, the emotional spikes designed to steer his decision. While others might get pulled into sympathy, pressure, or confusion, he zooms out, analyzing the architecture behind the emotional display. To him, manipulation is a pattern, not a feeling. And once he sees the pattern, the tactic loses all power. As the emotional manipulator intensifies their tactics, tears, anger, guilt, passive aggression, or dramatic gestures, he becomes even calmer. Their goal is to trigger a reaction, to force him into emotional compliance, to cloud his clarity. But instead of absorbing their chaos, he watches it reveal their intention. He notices what they emphasize, what they avoid, and what they hope he won't question. Every attempt to influence him emotionally becomes information rather than persuasion. And because he doesn't internalize the emotion being projected, the manipulator eventually realizes they're performing for someone who isn't playing along. Their frustration grows, their mask slips, and their true motive becomes impossible to hide. What makes him immune is the way his mind functions. Emotion doesn't blind him. It informs him. He doesn't dismiss feelings, but he doesn't let them dictate his judgment either. He can empathize without being controlled, understand without being swayed, listen without being manipulated. His emotional independence is what dismantles manipulation at its root. By reading patterns instead of reacting, he sees the truth behind the display long before the manipulator expects him to. And once he understands the motive, he detaches with a precision that leaves no opening for control. Emotional manipulation only works on those who get entangled in the performance. He never does. Social comparison doesn't work. He doesn't measure himself against others. People try to trigger competition by pointing sideways. Look what they have. Look how far they've gone. Look at what you're missing. Most fall for it instantly, adjusting their pace, their goals, even their identity to match or surpass someone else. But he never bites. Social comparison dissolves the moment it reaches him because his ambitions are internal, not reactive. He isn't chasing someone else's milestones or molding himself to fit another person's definition of success. When others try to provoke jealousy, urgency, or insecurity by highlighting someone's achievements, he doesn't speed up, he becomes still. He knows comparison is a trap designed to redirect his focus outward, and that's exactly why he refuses to participate. The more people attempt to push these comparisons, flaunting status, achievements, relationships, or progress, the more obvious the tactic becomes to him. He recognizes the subtle tone shifts, the emphasized details, the attempts to spark rivalry or diminish his confidence. But instead of feeling inferior or motivated to compete, he detaches emotionally. He doesn't feel threatened because he's not playing the same game. While others measure their worth through hierarchy and external markers, he measures his through growth, alignment, and authenticity, and that makes him unreachable. You can't manipulate someone who refuses to place themselves on the same scale as everyone else. What truly dismantles the tactic is his understanding that comparison is a distortion. It narrows perspective, blinds judgment, and breeds insecurity, tools that make people easier to influence. But he lives outside that framework. He doesn't view life as a race, and he doesn't view people as rivals. His only competitor is the person he was yesterday. So when someone tries to steer him with comparison, they end up revealing their own insecurities instead. His calm, grounded reaction exposes the emptiness of the strategy. He moves at his own pace, builds in his own lane, and defines success on his own terms. Social comparison only works on those who need external validation. He never has, and that's why the tactic fails before it ever touches him. Power plays break instantly because hierarchy and dominance games don't impress him. Power games rely on one assumption, that the other person cares about status, approval, or social positioning, but he doesn't. When someone tries to assert dominance through authority, intimidation, superiority, or subtle control, he sees the performance behind it. He doesn't get smaller, quieter, or defensive. He simply refuses to participate in a hierarchy he never agreed to. His calm neutrality becomes a direct counterforce to their attempt at control. While others rush to impress, submit, or challenge the dominant figure in the room, he stays centered. Their power means nothing to him because his sense of identity was never built on someone else's rank. As the power play escalates, raised voices, condescending remarks, strategic pressure, or forced compliance, he watches with an expression that reveals nothing. His silence isn't fear, it's evaluation. He examines the insecurity behind the dominance, the fragility beneath the arrogance, the desperation hidden inside the need to control. And because he doesn't react, the person trying to assert power begins to feel exposed. Dominance only works when the other person submits or competes. He does neither. He stands in the same quiet posture he had before, and that stillness becomes disarming. Their authority loses weight, Their superiority loses structure, and their demand for respect collapses the moment they realize he won't give obedience just because it's expected. What makes him immune is not rebellion, it's indifference to the entire power structure. He isn't impressed by titles, wealth, status, or loud voices. He respects character, not rank, and that mindset removes every leverage point a manipulator tries to use. The more they attempt to dominate him, the more obvious it becomes that he cannot be moved by artificial power. He won't compete, he won't defend his ego, and he won't fight for position, because he has nothing to prove. In that quiet refusal to engage, he becomes the most powerful presence in the room. Real power belongs to the one who doesn't need it to control others, and that's why their games fall apart the moment they confront him. Victim narratives fail because he sees through self-pity tactics to the real motive. When someone slips into a victim narrative, most people instinctively soften, offering comfort, reassurance, or compromise. But he doesn't move so easily. He listens, but not to the tears, trembles, or dramatic pauses. He listens to the structure beneath the story. What's missing, what's exaggerated, what's strategically emphasized. Victimhood used as manipulation always follows a pattern: deflect responsibility, inflate suffering, and redirect blame. And while others may be pulled in by the emotional weight, he tracks the inconsistencies and the intention. To him, self-pity isn't a plea for help. It's often a tool for control. And because he doesn't confuse emotion with truth, the narrative collapses before it ever reaches his decision-making. As the person leans deeper into their story, portraying themselves as helpless, misunderstood, or wronged by the world, they expect sympathy to lower his defenses. They expect guilt to push him into bending. But instead of responding emotionally, he becomes even stiller. He sees when someone uses vulnerability, not for connection, but for leverage. He notices the timing, how the narrative appears right after a boundary, just before a request, or immediately when accountability is required. The moment he detects that pattern, emotional weight loses all influence over him. He doesn't attack, he doesn't expose them publicly, but he quietly refuses to play the role they're trying to assign him. His calm detachment reveals the truth they hoped their story would hide. What makes him immune isn't coldness, it's discernment. He genuinely cares about real struggle, real pain, real vulnerability. But he will never reward weaponized self-pity. Instead of reacting, he steps back, letting the emotional fog clear until the truth stands on its own. And when the manipulator realizes their narrative has no grip on him, the mask slips. Frustration replaces tears, irritation replaces fragility. They reveal what he saw all along. Meanwhile, he remains grounded, unmanipulated, and unmoved by the tactic. Victim narratives only work on those who feel obligated to fix others' emotions. He never accepts that burden, and that clarity is what makes the manipulation break upon contact with him. Withholding affection or approval doesn't work because he sources validation internally. When someone pulls back affection or approval to create insecurity, most people feel the sting immediately. The doubt, the fear of losing connection, the pressure to earn warmth again. But he doesn't bend to that kind of manipulation. He doesn't rely on external praise to feel grounded, and he doesn't measure his worth by how much attention someone gives or withholds. The moment he senses affection being used as leverage, a delayed message, a colder tone, a sudden shift meant to provoke a reaction, he doesn't chase, he doesn't plead, he doesn't perform. Instead, he sees the tactic clearly. This isn't emotional distance, it's emotional currency. And he refuses to participate in relationships that operate like transactions. As the person continues to withhold warmth, expecting him to panic or compensate, they begin to feel the imbalance. He doesn't respond with insecurity, he responds with neutrality. His silence holds firm, his self-respect remains intact, and his energy stays centered. While they wait for him to crumble, he is evaluating. He notices how conditional their affection is, how quickly approval disappears when he doesn't fall in line, how their warmth returns only when they want something. This pattern meant to pull him closer does the opposite. Instead of becoming dependent, he becomes distant. Instead of trying harder, he withdraws emotionally. And in that withdrawal, the person realizes their tactic has failed, not because he's unaffected, but because he refuses to bond through manipulation. What truly dismantles the strategy is the source of his validation, himself. His confidence isn't built on compliments, attention, or approval. It's built on self-discipline, internal standards, and a deep understanding of who he is. That inner stability makes him immune to one of the most common forms of emotional control. You can't starve someone of affection when they don't rely on you for emotional nourishment. His independence exposes the weakness of the tactic and the insecurity of the person using it. Withholding affection only reveals who they are, not who he is. And once he sees that truth, he walks with clarity, knowing his worth was never dependent on someone else's approval in the first place. When psychological tactics fail on him, it's not because he's unemotional, it's because he's aware. He sees intention before expression, patterns before emotions, and manipulation before most people even sense a shift. His strength comes from inner stability, not outer influence, and that's why every tactic collapses the moment it meets his clarity. If you want more deep breakdowns of untouchable psychology and the silent strength that defines Sigma mindsets, make sure you subscribe to Silent Wise and tell me in the comments, which failed tactic have you seen the most and how did you handle it?